Hello there, everyone. Let me go quickly just make sure that everyone can see what I'm seeing here. Just to make sure, in particular, I'm worried about LinkedIn. So I'm just going to go check LinkedIn. Give me just a quick second. Okay, it's live. Okay, cool, 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 cool. We should be live on all the platforms. Uh, I'm going to hit present here. Oh, present. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Today we're going to be talking about starting an independent consulting company in 2024. It's crazy that it is already 2024, but here we are. So today, uh, although my main focus is generally data consulting companies, I did want to just reference this really fits everyone. You know, whether you're thinking about starting a marketing consulting company, data consulting company, software consulting company, more than likely some of this will speak to you as you're trying to figure out the right path forward. So let's kind of get started. Just a quick background. Maybe some of you know who I am. If you don't, my name is Ben Rogajan, aka the Seattle Data Guy. Which, if you're on YouTube, that's what you're likely watching here. You're likely watching me on YouTube. Before I consulted, like most people, I worked full time for several companies, including startup, Facebook, and in healthcare services. And while I have been consulting, I've honestly pretty much worked for almost every company underneath the sun. So that includes, finance, insurance, transportation, and so on. Uh, what I mostly focus on, like I said earlier, is really helping companies figure out how to set up their end-to-end data solutions and find value from their data. I think that's kind of the key area. It's not just about doing the work, which we're going to talk about that later, kind of doing the work versus, providing actual consulting, but also really helping people find kind of their path and their journey using data and actually making it valuable for themselves as a company. I like to say I'm an accidental writer and YouTuber, mostly because that's one way I started to get clients was by writing and by putting out videos. And so, yes, I do enjoy making these pieces of content, but it also does drive some clients my way. So that's why it's kind of accidental. Oh, on the wrong page. All right, so I think in order to understand kind of where and why people hire consultants and freelancers, and I'm going to kind of reference consultants and freelancers here at first, and then we'll kind of narrow it down a little more, is for a few reasons. One, there's a lack of talent. So the company might not have a certain skill or talent inside of their company, and they want to bring you on. Lack of human time. So they might need more time, right? They need more hands, essentially, is what will often be referenced. So they need to hire a bunch of people to do some work that they want to get done. Obviously, lack of experience, kind of similar to lack of talent, but like a lot of consulting, sometimes the reason you'll be brought in is because maybe their team, especially if you're thinking about like technical side of things, maybe their team is very accustomed to maintaining their current systems, right? Like, okay, we're used to managing these systems, we're used to maintaining them, but they're not used to maybe migrating systems, right? Migrations happen, they happen a lot, but maybe major migrations only happen once every 2-5 years, etc. So it might not be a good idea to have your team that doesn't do that a lot come in and try to do a migration. It might make sense to have someone that's doing migrations constantly to come in and kind of ensure that what you do is correct. So as you switch over to your new solutions, you pick the right solutions. You don't just lift and shift and so on. They want generally some sort of external opinion. That's usually another aspect of it. So maybe they've got some ideas, but they're looking for someone with someone to come in with a fresh pair of eyes to look at their solution that they've built, or maybe someone to come in with a fresh pair of eyes to look at their solution that they're proposing. I've had to do that a few times where it's like, honestly, my job is just to come in, look at what they have built or what they have planned to build and be like, hey, poke holes through this, tell us what's wrong with it. You've seen people build a few of these things, like what would you think here? And so that's not an uncommon project either. I like to put down that they want an excuse. I I don't think I've had this situation, but I have talked to people where sometimes people just want to pay $100,000 to have someone's opinion that they can lean on. That way, if it goes south, they can, point the finger somewhere else. Not that brings blame your direction, but it just gives them an out sometimes in larger projects that they've done their due diligence. They've hired people. They've made sure that someone else has looked at this, and if it fails, it's not because of them. And so sometimes that is a reason. So that kind of gives you the why. Like, why do people hire consultants? Now I think we're going to kind of separate consulting versus contracting, and I kind of put freelancing and contracting in the same space. Because there's a difference, and it's important to understand the difference between consulting versus contracting. If you've read Alan Weiss's book, you'll often hear that he references it like, a pair of hands versus a brain. Basically, contracting generally is viewed as a pair of hands. You're just an extra pair of hands that is doing work that people already have preset for you, and a brain is a little bit more. The other way you might hear some consultants talk about this is the fact that if the farther away you are from a keyboard, the more money you make, right? Like, so the more you're hands-on, the more likely you're not going to make a lot of money, just because of the fact that the impact that you drive can only be so much. And so that's generally the way people look at it. But kind of putting that a little more clearly in terms of two different sides of where things fit, right? Essentially, consultants, generally, you're brought on for expertise and guidance, right? Kind of, I brought that up earlier with experience. You've got more experience. You've got something that people want you to come in for. Again, you've done a ton of migrations, and people want to make sure that they're safe. You've set up a lot of data infrastructure, so they want to make sure that you bring in that insight there. So you have a lot of prior experience. You have expertise in this space. That makes it super valuable. Also, it tends to be a little more career focused, right? Contracting can tend to be like something, maybe you put down consultant, you're like an IT consultant or something during a moment where you didn't have a job, which is fine. I think that's fine, but it might not be your focus. Whereas consultants and people who want to be consultants generally try to make that shift away from working at companies, and are not just using it to maybe cover some job gap. And so that's generally a little bit of a difference. Generally, consultants have a little more ownership of whatever they're doing. You can talk back a little more to your clients, not in a bad way, but you can give your opinion a little more. Like when someone, maybe wants to go down a certain path, you can say, hey, I don't think that's the right way. And they'll hopefully listen to you, because they should. That's why they're paying you the big bucks. So that is also, you can share your opinion a little more, and they're paying you for it, right? Like, you're going to want to give it, and that's why they asked you. In fact, I've had times where they've clearly called out like, hey, I need you to give me an opinion here. So just that is kind of part of the differentiator. Again, contractor, more of an extra pair of hands. You've got clear and defined work, work that's like, hey, we need you to build a website, and here's exactly what it looks like, right? Like, they'll give you the diagrams. We're not going to tell you, or we don't want you to tell us what programming language to use. We know what we're doing. Or maybe they're literally, we just want you to build a module in this site. So it's very like well-defined type of work. And you don't need to usually assimilate with company culture. Most companies kind of treat contractors as just expendable people who are like, hey, we need to shrink because of budget issues. We're going to have to get rid of contractors first. That's generally kind of how it goes. So consultants, freelancers, again, I use freelancers and contractors kind of interchangeably, but that's kind of the difference when you think about consultants, freelancers. The hard thing with IT, I think, is that you can make so much money just being a contractor if you're smart, that you may never want to shift to a full-blown consultant, right? It can be very easy to get into a mode where, all I do is build websites, and you can make a ton of money that way. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong. Again, if you read Alan Weiss's book, he talks pretty, not negatively towards contracting, but like he's very specific on what he believes consulting is, and it's a little bit arrogant, but I sort of get it. But especially if you're in IT, you can definitely do a decent job in terms of like making a decent amount of money, even if you're more on the contracting side. I think if you're more on like, let's say the marketing side, that's where maybe like if you're a marketing consultant and all you're doing is maybe creating content or something similar and not doing like marketing strategy, then you probably won't make as much, and it can make a little more sense to want to be pushed into the consulting space. So consultants versus freelancers, that's kind of the difference that you'll often see. All right. So why should you freelance? Although actually this should say, why should you consult? One of the things that I saw recently last year was this kind of study that they were showing where, there's more and more in terms of like people in the millions of freelancers who are making, above six figures. And so I think this is going to be a continuing trend. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for people to take on a lot of companies as they kind of try to figure out all this technology, especially if you're in the tech space. It's complicated, and so as they're trying to figure it out, like there's a lot of opportunity for work there. I don't often say we're competing with each other, right? Like a lot of people might feel like, they compete with other small consultants. My general view is I like to say like I don't compete with other consultants my size. I compete with, I hope, Deloitte and things like that. Those are the people I want to take market share away from. There's plenty of work that generally goes around in the small person consulting space, and like the 1 person, 2 person, small teams consulting space. As you get better, like so some of the benefits, like when you first start, you're not going to take on the projects that you want. You're likely going to take on the projects that you get. But as you get better and as you kind of get familiar with the work, you'll likely take projects on that you want to take on a little more. It's a great way to practice. So if you have a full-time role and you can consult, I know not everyone can consult, but if you can consult in a full-time role, then that gives you this awesome opportunity to test out some new skills. Maybe, when I worked at Facebook, one of the problems is that you only worked on Facebook technology. So that was very limiting in terms of like career growth. But as you kind of, as I was consulting, I was exposed to a lot of the stuff that was going on outside of Facebook. You do need to work for a company that lets you do that. Not every company will. Facebook also had like a moonlighting clause, but I talked to people before I joined about that. So that's one thing. Increased pay, there's that opportunity depending where you work. It's really hard if you work for companies that are obviously in the FANGs, and if you're like high level engineer making $1 million a year. But if you're making maybe like 100 or 150 a year, there is some opportunity for some increased pay, or at the very least, even if it's just a side hustle, to bring home a little bit extra money. And that's also why I put security. So obviously, consulting has its own drawbacks. There's feast and famine cycles for some people. But security, I put it there mostly because if you're consulting on the side while you have, let's say, a full-time job and something happens, which has seemed to happen recently, a lot of layoffs have been occurring, you do have some opportunity to like either maybe switch full-time and just go consulting for the rest of the time, or just continue with those projects and you don't have no money coming in. So security is not a reference there to the actual work. That also does have a feast and famine cycle, but it is definitely some benefits there in terms of like having a little extra income coming in. So that's kind of like why I think people should consult in general. Okay. The obvious thing here is, how do you start? Like, where do you even start to understand and start your consulting journey? This is generally the priorities I view things as. There's a lot of ways you can get started. There's a lot of ways you can kind of approach this. Some people honestly consult on accident. When I first started consulting, I had a friend reach out to me who was like, "Hey, we need some help setting up or migrating from an Access database to a SQL Server database," and it was a big project-ish. So I was like, I'll set up a company, and that kind of kicked off my journey. But generally what I'd say is, step one, find what you're trying to solve, find that niche, find that unique thing that you think you offer that other people don't. You don't have to like find this perfect niche. I don't think you have to like define something perfectly. I honestly slowly fell into my niche where I was like doing general work for consulting and data. And then slowly you kind of figure out what problems you like solving, what problems exist. But generally, I think the first thing you want to do is start defining that early so you can start you'll start finding a path there. Once you find your niche, there's all the business stuff. The interesting thing here is like with the business stuff is when do you start doing it? For example, when I say business stuff, it's like, do you incorporate a company? At some point, the answer is yes, but early on, the answer might be no, right? Like if your company is not doing business, if your company is not landing deals, it can be expensive to incorporate and do all of that. So, you do want to make sure you have the budget to either do it or wait until you have money coming in to actually properly do that. And make sure you actually like consulting before maybe you can fully commit. Same thing with insurance, right? You need to get generally some sort of business insurance, some levels of liability insurance, professional insurance. Again, that can get very expensive, somewhere in the range of $1,000, $2,000 a year. So it's good to know that you need to do that. But if you're not landing clients, it's going to be an expense that has no value for you immediately. So the business stuff is important, make a website, etc. But, I just like putting it there is like, this is the second thing, but some of these things will kind of lag a little as you're doing other things. I'm just kind of curious what people are asking some questions about the US. I'll answer questions at the end, so feel free to keep posting questions. Pick your prospect engine. So this is something that I've been working on, and I'll eventually kind of share this through my various media platforms, which I'm kind of creating this concept of like prospect engines, where there are different ways and different paths people take to find clients and to find prospects. We'll talk about a few of them here in a second, but some people are really into, marketing. Some people are really into your traditional more sales processes. Some people are really into vendor relationships and having sales come from that direction. So figuring out how clients are going to find you, like how are you going to find clients? How are they going to find you? That's kind of the initial thing that's important, right? It's the lifeblood of every consultant, which is making sure you have business and work to do. So much so that if you decide to go down the consulting agency route, whereas like you build a consulting agency, that becomes your job. Is just number 3 is you're going to constantly be trying to find clients and do activities that finds clients, and you're just going to be sending your work to the people that you've hired to actually do the work. So you no longer do the work in that space. But early on, this is super important because if you don't have clients, you don't have a business and you don't have money. So that's why it's definitely very early on. Once you kind of know what problems you want to solve, once you've kind of defined who in those spaces you're going to solve those problems for, right? Like, is it a VP of data? Is it a VP of software or CIO? Once you've defined that and kind of what problems they're trying to solve, you can start writing content or targeting specific people with, some form of either ad or similar, and talk about how you can solve their problem. All right. Next, learn how to deliver value. So I put this one here before pricing because everyone always asks, like, how much should I charge? And a lot of things about like how much should you charge, I think, become more clear once you understand what's valuable to a client. Like, what are you actually trying to deliver to a client? One, you need to actually work with clients and deliver and be successful delivering, right? It's very easy to work for clients, and when you first start out, maybe not do as good of a job as you could, not because you're not technically smart, not because you don't know what you're doing, but because it is kind of a different game in terms of understanding what clients need, what they need delivered, how they need it delivered, how you can best communicate with them, how you can best work with them to make sure everything goes from A to B successfully. Making sure that you're constantly communicating, things like that. You'll learn over time, but if you're early on, you might take a second. So that's why I say learn to deliver value first, and then you can kind of focus on pricing. Give me 1 second. Well, it's a little cold right now. All right. Next is pricing. So obviously, at some point, pricing becomes important. If you want to, again, make more than you're making at your full-time role, eventually pricing becomes an issue because you start hitting caps. There's only so much you can charge per hour. There's only so much you can, eventually kind of put into an hourly rate. And so most people find that they eventually have to start thinking about things like value-based pricing and things like that. Because if you charge, $300 an hour, $400 an hour, $500 an hour, there's an eventual point where clients will be like, I don't want to pay this much an hour. Like it's too much and I don't understand it. But I will also say there's an important aspect of positioning in that. So I've kind of put this chart over here in the corner where you can kind of look at the different positions of price, right? For example, you can have things by quality and by price. And generally my goal is to be somewhere in the like high medium. So, or like high quality and like either like medium or high value, essentially, or high price, because that's where I would like to be. I don't want to be viewed as an average consultant. I always want to say like, hey, I think my consulting services, because of the value that I drive, tends to fit more in this premium space. But again, you'll slowly start to figure out like, oh, how do I price more effectively to make sure that I'm actually capturing all the value that I'm offering? And I think that's what's an important way to look at it is if you're offering someone $100,000 of value, then arguably the project, and I think a lot of people will say this, is like worth about $10,000 or something in that range, where it's like you should be charging about at least 1/10 of whatever value you're driving. So if the project is worth $1 million and it drives $1 million of value, it's not crazy to say $100,000. It's just a way of thinking about it. Obviously, you'll find a way that you can price. Actually, I put this link below. I talk a little bit more about pricing in the Technical Freelancer Academy. If anyone wants to check it out, it's below. But there's also a free 30-day checklist you can go through if you're setting up your own consulting company below. So don't miss those things. All right. So kind of just taking a step back again and saying finding a niche. So I think it can feel like everyone always is doing things that you're already doing or you want to do. In fact, I put together this course for Technical Freelancer Academy, and suddenly I'm getting ads for all these other companies that exist that are also selling a similar service, but more broadly, generally, like, oh, we help you as consultants. So it can feel like you're going to compete with other people, but there's always, I think, a niche. There's, if everybody's doing, as this quote says, if everybody's doing something one way, there's a good chance you can find a different niche going exactly in the opposite direction. So there's always an opportunity, I think, to find something in a space, even if you see a ton of other people, that isn't being touched or maybe is completely new. One of the benefits of being in technology is that things change so frequently that you can likely find a new niche all the time. Right? There's new niches all the time. They exist. They're there. We're talking about AI nowadays. We're adding all these new layers of technology. So there's always something you can add in terms of value. So that's kind of that first part. The next part, again, is client acquisition. And I want to go deeper into some of the ways you can acquire clients. There's a lot of ways you can acquire clients. These are just a few of them. They're not even all of them. And I put marketing and branding together, and that's not, they probably shouldn't even be together, but I put them together because for me, like how I market and how I brand tend to hit each other a lot. But these are the ways you'll often see. So marketing and branding, the way I like to say, or at least marketing in particular, tends to take a little longer, right? Marketing requires you create content. It requires that you kind of constantly exist in a space. You're posting on LinkedIn, you're posting on maybe YouTube, if that's your space. You're creating some lead magnets of some kind. If you're in the marketing space, maybe guides on how you should create a better marketing strategy. Just you're creating some sort of flow and way that people find you and understand that you're the expert. You're giving away a ton of free content, essentially, generally in the marketing space, to kind of have people believe that you are, an expert in your field. Or you're doing things like ads as well. That's another space that you can obviously also market. You're doing things like paid ads, which may also still kind of sell that expert side of you, but maybe is a little more targeted. It tends to be a little longer in that path, especially if you go the route of like creating content versus paid ads, only because it takes a long time for people to see some piece of content, start connecting that you are this person. And eventually, running to the actual problem that you're offering to solve, and then go and hire you for it. So, marketing tends to take a little bit longer, but the benefit I think of marketing is that once you have something that people know you for, once they know you as the whatever person, then you have this strong brand, and it's harder to move, right? Like it's a kind of mainstay of a company, or a mainstay of like the industry. Sales, so more sales motions, activities. tend to be faster. Like I know people who are very good at targeting cold emails or warm emails and getting warm leads to the exact people that they need in companies and targeting the exact email that they need and getting conversations very quickly. It's definitely very hard. And I think especially when you think about the automated approach people are taking currently towards sales and a lot of the sales maybe motions that people have taken in the past. I think that's kind of getting harder and harder because it's easier and easier to ignore people on LinkedIn. I do it all the time. Like if people try to reach out to me on LinkedIn, it's not personal. It's just there are so many people that reach out to me that it becomes very, very difficult to parse through that email or the DMs. And that's something I think LinkedIn could definitely work on. Obviously, besides things you can do, there are also things like agencies and third parties. So third parties, I often view this as like Upwork. That is an option, right? You can go on Upwork and you can definitely try to get clients there. There is a market there. There's obviously clearly clients there. The problem is generally one, you're generally doing more contracting work. You're generally being hired, not as a consultant, but as someone to be an extra pair of hands, right? They have some clear work and they want you to do it. And that's kind of generally a very clear relationship. Also, you can't generally build your brand that well because you're really just through Upwork. You're just viewed as an Upwork person. And it tends to be a race to the bottom in terms of pricing because you have everyone else there. Everyone else there is competing with you. And so unless you have already gotten 5 stars, 1,000 people working with you, it's really hard to get that next person to work with you. So Upwork tends to be a little more challenging, I think, in that direction. You can work to it eventually to get a good deal. And I think for certain people in certain countries, it's probably honestly a better deal because you can work with people from all over the world. And so you can get some benefits and arbitrage of, if you're in a place that has maybe a lower general income, you can make more because you can work with people from, America or a different country where they maybe make more. And you can kind of arbitrage that difference. So there definitely are benefits there. But I think if you're in the US, it's harder to win because there are people out there that will work less than you. Agencies, on the other hand, there's a lot of agencies that do exist out there. I've worked for a few of them. Again, you won't be able to work your brand, but generally they'll pay you a little more, right? Maybe not the $300 an hour you're aiming for, but if you've got no other work and you're getting in someone that's like $150, $200 an hour from an agency, that's kind of nice. Generally, the way agencies work is they will find projects for you to do, and then they'll give you their price, and they'll give you maybe 10%, or they'll put like a 10% kind of profit on top of you, essentially. Or 20% even in some cases, or 30. I've actually heard some pretty crazy things where they're like, oh, we can't do that price because we need to put 50% on top of your rate. And I was like, all right, well, that's crazy. That's a lot of margin for nothing except for bringing me a client. Obviously, networking is always important. So in fact, when you first start your consulting journey, the way I've heard most people get their clients initially is through networking. Whether that means you're reaching out to people in your, softball league, whether that means you're going to events around your area, there is so much in terms of work, in terms of like networking opportunities that you can find possible new clients that I wouldn't get, that I would definitely start there. And I actually give a template for a letter and kind of talk through how you can do it in the 30-day checklist below, which is free. Again, you can just click on it. It's a Google sheet. But yeah, it's a great way of just like letting people know that you've got something that you're offering now, and hopefully finding your first few smaller projects that aren't maybe as big. And then finally, vendor partnerships. So this was actually one I didn't realize was as important early on. But vendor partnerships, kind of as it suggests, is you partnering with companies that often want to get put into, or sold into another company. So as a data person, an example of this would be something like Snowflake, or you can think of Fivetran. Generally, these companies would like to, obviously increase their sales. And if you bring them possible clients, what ends up sometimes happening is a flywheel where it's like if you can slowly start bringing them clients, they're going to want you to continue to do that. So their account executives might start, bringing you in to help close deals because it might be like, oh, hey, our project is currently blocked, or they don't want to actually sign the deal. because they don't have the technical expertise to set this up. So we want to actually work with you to help them set this up, because we don't have maybe a full-time consulting staff. Maybe got some solution engineers, but not a full-time, person that can do this work for a company beyond a few weeks. So we want you to go in there and like help them out. So vendor partnerships tend to be very important, especially in the tech space, because there's a lot of growth on both sides. And in fact, if you see most companies that like, you'll be like, oh wow, where did this consulting or how did this consulting company grow from 30 people or one person to 30 people, 40 people, 100 people overnight? Generally, they're very well connected with a vendor, which keeps this flywheel of work going, where they grow very quickly. And some vendors will even like create their own consulting companies just to keep like essentially SaaS or recurring revenue off their books, because it's better in terms of like if they're trying to sell it or if they're trying to like position themselves in maybe like, you think about like if they're public in terms of like how much they're worth. Because if they have too much consulting revenue on their books, it can maybe damage some of their like value, which if you like know Palantir, that was a problem that they've had in the past, because they were viewed as a consulting company and not as a tech company. And that tends to damage like how valuable people perceive your company to be, because of like how much you can actually grow. So vendor partnerships is another important one. If you can find a good vendor that's growing, that's doing well, and you can start helping them out, they'll likely want to start helping you out. So it's very much a give and take in that space. All right. So where you'll start. So I've kind of put together, again, a 30-day checklist for consulting. It should be below. If not, let me know. But it kind of just goes through week by week, some ideas of where you can get started. So week 1, again, start your business, define what you're going to do, define what value you're going to offer people, make that very clear. Week 2, create the website, your socials, get everything set up, make sure you're ready to, when someone asks you, hey, like, what's your consulting company? And you say, abcconsulting.com or ABC Consulting, and they look it up, they find you. It's very important. I feel like business cards are less necessary. I feel like a website is arguably your billboard. It's your place you can actually sell yourself. So having a website, I think, is important. Again, start letting your network know that you're doing things. Again, I gave a template email, essentially, you could send out, but list out everyone that you think you could get warm leads from. Ask them for warm leads from people. Start really talking to people and figuring out, hey, where can I actually start finding work? So you really need to start actually kind of doing those motions of finding new work. Next, start creating content and marketing, right? Like start letting people know that you exist, start testing out ideas. And I get more specific about this in the actual checklist, but that's kind of the next point. Is week 4 is like, hey, actually start showing off what you're trying to sell. Like, hey, what do you do? What do you offer? What's the value? What problems are you trying to solve? How do you do it? How have you done it in the past? Or how can you help people? It doesn't have to be immediately like selling to people, but like really share your experiences, share your skills, share the ways you've solved problems in the past. So I think that's very important. Let's see. Cool. Oh man. Winter is always terrible. All right. Now, what is up and coming? So in the Seattle Data Guy, I've got a few things that I'm working on to kind of help, if you're looking into consulting. So one, I want to do an increased inbound leads webinar. So I'm going to be hopefully aiming to do that in February. So if you're looking to, if you're already consulting and you're looking to increase your inbound leads, that'll hopefully be interesting. So look out for that. I'm going to finally be launching the official community for the TFA, essentially. I've got one currently. It's on Discord, but I've been putting together one on, I think, hopefully a nicer program that will be a little more focused on consulting, and then more consulting content on YouTube and Substack. So if you're not following me already for that stuff, consider following me for that stuff, because I really will be aiming to talk more about consulting and how you can start all of that. So again, there should be some links below that can get you into some of those directions. All right, now it's really honestly just Q&A. I just wanted to have a 30-minute conversation here. I'm going to see if there's any questions that people might have, and I'll kind of go from maybe the top. Let's see. I make great money. This is interesting. So someone just brought up, I made great money as an IT contractor, as a hands-on keyboard freelancer. The challenge is keeping up with tech. Yeah. I think this is always the hard thing, is that tech goes so fast. I mean, you could argue it's the same problem if you work in tech, but if you get a job at a company, more than likely, you can become the person that is the SSIS or the DBA or whatever it is kind of role that manages something. And unless the company switches from that technology, you might just be that person. Let's see. It's not a contextual question, but do you have any material group or guidance for people who are on visa in the US to start consulting? No, nothing like on that regard. I'm going to be doing some stuff for European consulting because I've got some people that would like to answer that question, but I don't have anything about visas specifically, so I'm not sure on that. What would you say your niche is? Honestly, specifically, my niche is arguably like weirdly specific is like it's just around Airflow and being the Airflow person. Like if you need help setting up Airflow or working with Airflow, it's like data engineering, but like drill down even more in terms of like which technology have I kind of gotten a lot of my clients from. Airflow is an interesting space. So I like to say, like, if you can find technology that's very popular but slightly complicated, it's a good space to be in. So Airflow is an example. I think Databricks is another example. And you can niche down even further, obviously. Like you could be like the Databricks person that works specifically on, machine learning or something. But because these technologies are just slightly complicated or a little more complicated than maybe most people are going to be able to like learn in a few months, they offer an opportunity for a consultant to come in because you can offer a lot of help just answering even what might seem like basic questions in technology. All right. As a data consultant, while I have a good foundation of data fundamentals, my development and understanding design principles has been the most impactful aspect of my career development. Oh, cool. Yeah, that can make sense. Yeah, design tends to be very important. Where do you find these agencies to get you started? There's one called Open Teams. That's one example. That's the one I've worked with in the past. There's probably a few others as well. Generally, like they might find you, although you can probably look up, consulting agencies of some kind or third-party agencies. But yeah, they'll generally find you if you've got some space. How crucial was YouTube channel for Seattle Data Guys blog traffic? What's your advice for early stage blogs? Honestly, so I did not. I was blogging far before I built up the YouTube channel. I've been blogging for a while. What helped grow blog traffic tended to be more one. I wrote on Medium occasionally, and then would point back to my blog. Although I think their terms of services like tells you not to do that, but why else would I write for free on a different site? So that's one way. You have to get your content out on other spaces as well. Reddit is one option. Obviously, it's hard with Reddit because people are very anti, selling yourself. So you do have to be careful when you do it on Reddit to make sure you're not like overselling and only selling your ideas. But also generally good content will get noticed. I think that's important. So one, SEO exists. So if you can hit SEO that people aren't doing or aren't answering, that's one thing. And two, good content tends to be its own kind of marketing and distribution. Like you'll find people who have blogs you maybe never read, but then they had the piece that was just right that people started sharing around. You can also share things on different platforms like Twitter, et cetera. So you have to find like a distribution hub essentially that will continue to get you new people to notice you, and then also build SEO. So those are kind of good paths. Medium versus Substack. So Medium, I do have some things I like about Medium and some things I like about Substack. Obviously, Medium, the thing I dislike is I think currently I have almost 60,000 followers on Medium. But if I write an article that Medium decides they don't like, whatever, their algorithm's not going to share it. Like it's just how it is. So I don't like that. Like it's like you can work really hard to get thousands of followers, but it means nothing, right? Like I've got articles that have been seen by 1,000 people because it didn't meet whatever Medium wanted it to meet. So that's my view there. But it's good for distribution because there are eyeballs there that you will get. Substack, I love it. You get to own the email, which is great. And so as long as you're putting out great content, you'll start slowly building out like people that want to read you. So again, the thing there is like you have to get a way for people to find you and send you their emails essentially. So that's the only trick there. But yeah, that's my view. Like they both have benefits. I like Substack better, but Medium has its benefits too. And that's why you'll see me occasionally still put content there. How would you suggest starting a finance consulting? That's actually interesting. How would I start finance consulting? That's, you know what, the problem there for me is that's too broad. Like, do you mean like financial analysis? Do you mean accounting? Do you mean, yeah, I'm not sure what finance consulting means. So maybe if you give me a little more insight, I could try to help there. Where do I find the Discord group and be active in the groups? Well, the Discord group that I'm referring to, I don't know if this is the one you're asking about, is where is it? It's a paid group, so you can join it if you join the course. But besides that, like if you're talking about groups and to find possible work, like if you're talking about consulting, you want to find possible work, there are a ton of Slack groups for different companies. So like DBT's got their Slack group that's got like 40,000 people in it, I think at this point, and other similar data engineering Slack groups that exist. And if you are helpful on those Slack groups, I've definitely seen people get projects that way as well, right? Like if you're the person that's like constantly answering questions, helping people out, it can lead to possible work as well. So generally, you always have to prove yourself first a little bit. So, but that's also an option. How much will you negotiate price with customer versus sticking to your rate or project estimate? So one of the things that I like to do, and I found that a lot of people do this, and I think it was because we've all read the same books, is when I send a project estimate, I don't send one project estimate. I will send generally 2 or 3 project estimates, unless it's very clear that it's one project. But I'll send like 3 project estimates where it's like, here's the highest tier ticket item. Like, this is everything you've asked for, maybe a little bit extra, highest tier ticket item. Here's maybe a mid, covers half of the things you asked for, ticket item price. And here's the third, maybe I'm just doing purely coaching and advising and you're doing all the work or something, which maybe has good margin, but doesn't have a lot of, doesn't have a lot of bulk work. So I'll break it down into those 3 kind of individual options. And in that, they'll kind of have a high, medium, and low tier price. And that's the negotiation. It's like, here's what I can offer. Here's the prices I offer it at. If those don't work, right, then, maybe we can't work together, right? Like I try to stick very close to my prices. If you start negotiating, it can definitely, it's definitely never been good. I think that's the thing. It's like, I haven't had a good experience when I've like taken down my prices. Like, okay, sure, I'll lower my prices. There will always be another project if you have the right engine set up. So that's the way I view it. Give them the option to negotiate and pick their own price is the way I kind of view negotiating. It's like, I don't want to sit there and find, what's the term? Pick up dimes, walk over a dollar, pick up dimes. I'm going to stick with my prices generally. How did you start with YouTube videos, editing and filming? Honestly, I started by filming it via this camera that I'm using right now, which is terrible, but it is my laptop camera. I don't even think I had a mic. I might have bought a mic, and I was editing in iMovie by myself manually, trying to like clip the audio and the video together, and it took hours. Now I honestly just use my phone for the video. I will use one of 2 mics that I have for the audio, and I'll send both of those to a third party to edit essentially. So I have someone that I work with to manage all of that, because I don't edit or do anything like that anymore. No. This question: any tools to be proficient on? I don't know if that means like technical, like tools on the consulting side or tools in the data world. So I'm not sure if you mean like, be proficient in. Yeah, I don't know which one you're asking me to be proficient in. How do you convince customers to buy products versus hours from you? Back to the topic of per hour and distance from the keyboard. Yeah, so generally, actually, there was a person who posted about this on LinkedIn recently, Sawyer. He talked about kind of the various stages of kind of growth. I'd almost look at it as you learn to get better at consulting. So I don't remember the exact tiers, but it's like tasks, time, outcomes or outputs, outcomes, and transformations. And so what you're essentially selling is just higher levels of that, right? Initially, you're likely just selling tasks and time, which is per hour, right? Like it's projects per hour. That's what you're going to sell. But as you start selling things like outcomes and transformations, that's what you're going to be selling. You're selling this like, hey, at the end, here's where your company will be at, right? Here's how we're going to transform your company, and here's the value of that. That's kind of the way you end up positioning it. Instead of saying like, hey, yeah, I'm going to work like 100 hours, you can be like, hey, at the end, you're going to have, self-service analytics, whatever your goal is, right? And that is worth to you probably $500,000, let's say, if you're a large company. So that's what I'm going to charge you, right? Like I'm going to charge you $500,000 because that's what it's worth to you. So that's generally the way you position it, is like you're not trying to focus on the work, you're trying to focus on the outcomes more. And I think that's what's kind of important to distinguish in terms of like charging more. Not accounting, fin analysis, and data analysis. So this person earlier asked, how would they start a financial analysis company essentially? I'd say, you could probably just start it by similar to what we talked to earlier today. One, be clear exactly what problems you're going to solve in the financial analysis and data analysis space. And then from there, start reaching out to people that be like, hey, this is the stuff I'm going to be doing. These are the problems I'm going to solve. Do you know anyone that has that kind of work that I could work with? And then you can start creating content and stuff in that space as well. How do you get partnerships with vendors? Generally, step one, most vendors have partnership programs that you can sign up for as long as you have a company to work through. So that's step one. You can just go to their partnership site and set up the official partnership. Step two is working directly with their account executives. So that's generally the real way you do it. Like they won't necessarily send you clients because it's part of their program, but account executives are incentivized to send you essentially work because they either need to close a deal. They need to close a deal, they need to close a deal. And likely you've been sending them a deal here and there. And they're like, oh, this person sends me deals. I want them to keep sending me deals because it makes me look good. So I'm going to send them a deal in order to like keep them or keep me on top of their mind. So it really is like there's the official partnership route, and then there's the working through an account executive, because it's the partnership with the person that really makes the difference. Let's see. How do you measure our ROI for a data engineering project? I think there's a few things. Like there's both tangible and intangible, obviously, kind of ROI in terms of like return on investment. There's the things that you can't often cover. For example, I think some of the things you often see almost immediately as you start doing data engineering projects, especially greenfield data engineering projects where no one's had access to data, is the sudden desire to work with data, right? Most companies, as soon as you give them access to data, they're like, oh my gosh, I have all this data. I have like 1,000 projects I could take on. And so that's kind of not necessarily fully tangible, I think, because they still have to pick which ones they're going to take on, right? Like, okay, I've given you access to all your data. We've done like a basic dashboard. And now your company's actually super excited to work with data. I think that is super valuable, where there isn't this like, oh, here's a pure dollar amount we can add to it. It's like we've transformed your company's complete mindset to being excited to work with data. That is invaluable, right? Like that is something that doesn't have, I think, a price tag. The more obvious stuff, like if you're talking about like direct ROI and examples in the past that I've done, is where, let's say you're trying to do like fraud detection or something. That one's very easy often to attach an ROI to it, because it's like, okay, last year we detected this much fraud. This year with a new thing we've built, I've detected $1 million worth of fraud. Well, and we've been in general, that should be worth $1 million. The hard thing there is then they have to adjudicate claims. So with fraud, it's not just as easy to detect it. You also have to like go in and actually do something about it. But you could still argue that, hey, my thing is capturing $1 million worth of fraud. It's accurate. We know it's accurate. Now it's up to you guys to kind of do the work. So those are sometimes the easier ones. Also, it could be like, hey, we helped you, let's say, optimize your Snowflake cost. I've done that before in the past, where it's like, oh yeah, like we've saved you, $200,000 a year on Snowflake costs. That's clear ROI. Like if they paid me $50,000 to build and save them money, that's a good ROI, I'd say, in terms of their investment. If year over year they're saving $200,000, $300,000. So those are like the easy ways you can kind of do ROI. But there's a ton of intangible stuff, and I think you should never skip the intangible stuff, because that is like the stuff that arguably is invaluable. There's the very strict calculated side, but there's the very other side of it as well. What do you suggest for an early consulting service for data engineering? I mean, the early stuff you can do is things like data warehousing, helping companies build their data warehouse, optimizing their Snowflake instance, or optimizing Databricks, setting up Databricks, maybe building some data pipelines. It doesn't have to be focused on the transformation part. It really is focused on that contracting space where it's like, hey, here's problems I can solve that are very technical, that you guys could I can solve very easily for you. Okay. How much do you learn things outside of your area of expertise that might be required for the project? Maybe a project is 90% data engineering, but you also need a simple web app on top of that, which you might not have experience with. Will you learn how to do a simple web app or try to sub that out? Yeah, I mean, generally, it would depend on exactly what the simple web app would mean. One, there's solutions that exist. I like Retool, for example, that if you're talking about building a simple web app, it will do for you, right? Like you can just drag and drop, and if this is all that they need is a basic GUI, I wouldn't even code that, right? Like I think part of being a consultant is, one, reading your client and being like, hey, they want me to build a simple web app and they can't. Can they maintain a simple web app, right? Like if I set up like something on AWS and on Beanstalk and all these things, and I've built this app, can they maintain that? Probably not. So then you have to find a better solution. So for example, I've done this in the past where I was talking with a client. They wanted me to build a simple web app. And they were like, yeah, we'll use like all these solutions. They were very excited. And I was like, that's great. You're the only IT person besides me currently, that's doing this work. We're not going to do that, or at least I don't think we should do that. I think what we should do is just build it again off Retool, which is just a light UI kind of builder, because that's all you need. And they weren't fully convinced, so I like built it in a day, and they're like, okay, yeah, this is definitely a good path to follow. So yeah, if it's something that's like bigger, I'd probably sub it out. I probably wouldn't do it. Again, stay away from hands-on keyboard as much as possible. I'd be like, hey, you need this expertise. I can help you find it. That would be my solution. Or maybe I already know someone that can do the work. But I would generally want to stay in my area of expertise, right? Like that's kind of your goal. Your goal is to be like, hey, I'm an expert in this space. I don't need to do someone else's work, right? Like that can be someone else's problem. My problem is to solve, X, Y, Z. And that's where I try to focus generally. If you're early on, I can understand you need the work, you need the money. It makes sense to try to take on everything. But the more you get into it, the more you're like, you know what? I'm going to focus on the things I do, and I'm not going to like expand beyond that too much. What are some marketing strategies to penetrate into the market as a starter? I mean, there's a ton of free space. I think a lot of companies have a hard time marketing. Generally, what I'd say in order to figure out like what to market on is, again, figure out who you're trying to target. Like, who is the person that you want to sell to? Who's the person that's going to either bring you to the person who has a buying decision, or who is the person with the buying power? What problems do they have? And market around those problems, right? Like write content, start testing out ideas. I like to test out ideas on LinkedIn as like a place to be like, hey, do people engage with this? Who's engaging with this? And then that helps me kind of target the content that I put out. So that's I think a good way of doing it. It's like, hey, step one, figure out who you're going to target at. Step two, what problems do they have? Step three, kind of start writing pieces and content and put out content in that space. See who responds, maybe on something like LinkedIn. To that, do they match the target audience you're trying to get to, and kind of keep adjusting there. So that's the way I kind of run experiments on like LinkedIn and things like that. So I think that's kind of the way I'd say you can kind of start trying to break into spaces. Awesome. Well, if no one else has any more questions, we can kind of call it. Let me know. We'll give it a second. Thanks everyone for watching. This is great. I wish I wasn't sniffly. Always end up being sniffling on these things, but it was great. So let me know. Awesome. Well, it seems like there are no more questions. Thank you so much for everyone for watching, starting an independent consulting company in 2024. And I'll hopefully see you guys at the next one. Again, I will be doing another webinar. So do watch out for one on inbound, essentially increasing your inbound marketing leads. I'd like to get more specific on that. Thanks, everyone. And I'll see you guys next time.